Congresswoman Omar, as of 6 a.m. this morning, you are the subject of an FBI criminal investigation. FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino's words cut through the House Judiciary Committee hearing room like a gunshot. There was no preamble, no introduction, no warning. The words just hung in the air for a half second, the precise amount of time it takes for the human brain to process something completely unexpected, before the room exploded into absolute chaos. Ilhan Omar, who had been in the middle of a fiery, prepared attack on Bongino's partisan bias and dangerous agenda, froze. The words she was about to say died on her lips. Her mouth actually hung open slightly. Her hand, which had been raised in a gesture of accusation, was stuck in midair. Bongino, a 25-year veteran of law enforcement, continued in the flat, professional tone of a cop who'd read Miranda rights 1,000 times. He was not angry. He was not political. He was simply stating facts. You have the right to have legal counsel present. You have the right to decline to answer questions that might incriminate you under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you? He was reading her rights. In a live, televised congressional hearing, the political theater of the day had just become a crime scene. Chairman Jim Jordan's gavel was banging. A useless, frantic thwack, thwack, thwack against the wall of sound. Reporters were shouting over each other. Democrats were on their feet, screaming, outrageous, and, point of order. Republicans leaned forward in their seats, their expressions a mix of pure, stunned shock and grim satisfaction. Camera operators scrambled, pushing each other to get the best angle on Omar's face as the color drained from it in a visible, sickening rush. What? Omar's voice finally cracked. The confident, commanding tone she'd carried into the hearing just moments before was completely shattered, replaced by a high, thin wail of disbelief. This is outrageous. Mr. Chairman, this is political persecution. This is exactly what I warned. Ma'am, Bongino interrupted, his voice, calm and measured, cut through her protest like a knife through warm butter. The chaos in the room quieted slightly. Straining to hear, he had not raised his voice, he had simply spoken with the unbeatable authority of a man holding all the cards. He opened a bright red folder, a color usually reserved for the most sensitive materials, stamped with classification markings. Top secret, SINOFORN. The kind of evidence that came from NSA intercepts. The kind of intelligence that couldn't be shared with America's closest allies. On December 18, 2022, Bongino began, reading from the document. You traveled to Doha, Qatar. While there, you met with Sultan bin Saud Al Maraiki, Qatar's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, and Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, the Prime Minister of Qatar. This was an unreported meeting. You failed to properly notify the State Department as required by House ethics rules for foreign travel by members of Congress. Shifts, self-correction. The subject is Ilhan Omar. Omar's eyes narrowed. But Bongino continued, laying out the facts. 22 days after that secret meeting, on January 9, 2023, a company called Meadowbrook Consulting LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands, wire transferred exactly $250 to the E Street Group. He paused, letting that number land. And the E Street Group, as we know, is the political consulting firm owned by your husband, Tim Minette. Bongino slid a document across the table, a high-resolution copy of the wire transfer receipt, so the cameras could zoom in. The numbers were clear, the date was clear, the amount was clear. The FBI's Financial Forensics Unit, Bongino continued, traced Meadowbrook Consulting LLC through 3 intermediary shell corporations, right back to Qatar Foundation International, a Qatari state-owned entity directly controlled by the Qatari government. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Omar's. In other words, Congresswoman, 22 days after you held a secret meeting with senior Qatari officials, the Qatari government paid your husband's company $250,000. This was the quid. Now, Bongino was about to provide the quo. Bongino pulled out another document. This one, a timeline chart, was prepared for the monitors. He had it displayed so everyone in the hearing room, and every C-SPAN camera, could see it clearly. And then, Bongino continued, over the next 7 months, You cast 7 crucial votes in the House of Representatives. Votes that just so happened to align perfectly with Qatari foreign policy interests. He began to list them. A drumbeat of betrayal. February 3, Road, 2023. You voted no on designating Iran's Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, as a terrorist organization. Qatar, as you know, maintains close ties with Iran. You voted Qatar's position. March 17, 2023. You voted no on authorizing new arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Qatar, as you know, is in a bitter regional struggle with Saudi Arabia. You voted Qatar's position. April 12, 2023. You voted no on a resolution supporting the U.S. military presence in Bahrain. Qatar competes with Bahrain for regional influence. You voted Qatar's position. May 8, 2023. You voted no on maintaining sanctions on Syria. Even giving a floor speech advocating for lifting them. Qatar has been pushing to normalize relations with Syria. You voted Qatar's position. June 2, 2023. You voted no on the appropriations bill that included $500 million for Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. July 15, 2023. You voted no on the entire Defense Authorization Act, citing its increased funding for Middle East military partnerships. August 9, 2023. You voted no on an emergency military aid package for Israel. Bongino looked up from his documents. His expression as hard as granite. You met with Qatari officials in secret. They laundered $250 into your husband's bank account. And then you voted exactly how they wanted you to vote. 7 consecutive times. That's not foreign policy disagreement. Congresswoman, that's a transaction receipt. That's bribery. That's acting as an unregistered foreign agent for the government of Qatar. That's a conspiracy to defraud the United States. And that's why, as of this morning, you are under FBI investigation for violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and federal money laundering statutes. The hearing room was in absolute pandemonium. CNN had cut to breaking news. MSNBC's panel looked shell-shocked. Omar's hands were shaking so badly she knocked over her water glass. Her lawyer, who had just arrived, was frantically whispering in her ear, trying to get her to stop talking, to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights, to shut down before more damage was done. But Omar couldn't help herself. The arrogance that had led her into the trap was now preventing her from seeing the way out. You have been reading my emails. My bank records, she shouted, her voice trembling. This is surveillance. This is the illegal surveillance of a sitting member of Congress. This is. Ma'am, Bongino interrupted again, and this time his voice carried an edge of something cold and dangerous. When foreign governments pay United States Congress members in exchange for votes, that's a national security threat. The FBI didn't start by surveilling you. We were surveilling them, the Qatari officials you met with. He let that sink in. That is completely legal under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, for foreign intelligence collection purposes. He pulled out another document. This one was thick with heavy black redactions. But the parts left visible were all that mattered. And when the National Security Agency, Bongino continued, intercepted communications between those Qatari government officials discussing payments to an American congresswoman, when they specifically used your name, when they outlined exactly what they expected you to do in return for that $250. That's when you became part of a counterintelligence investigation. Bongino's eyes locked onto Omar's. We have the intercepts. Congresswoman, we have Qatari officials discussing you by name, discussing the payment, discussing your votes. One official, 3 weeks after the money was transferred, said, and here Bongino read directly from the translated, declassified transcript. Omar has been very helpful. The $250 investment was worthwhile. She will continue to vote as we require on matters of importance to Qatar. The Americans are surprisingly easy to buy when you know their price. She is now our asset. He closed the folder with a decisive snap. You were bought by Qatar for $250. And I have the receipts. Congresswoman, all of them, bank records, wire transfers, NSA intercepts, a documented pattern of votes that directly benefited a foreign government immediately after they paid you. Bongino leaned forward slightly. So when you ask how the American people can trust me to be impartial, I'd suggest you're asking the wrong question. The question Americans should be asking is, how can they trust you to represent them, when you're actually representing Qatar? Omar sat frozen in her chair, her face ashen. She'd walked into an ambush, and there was no way out. You're going to need a lawyer, Congresswoman, Bongino said, his tone matter of fact. A good one, a very good one, because what I just described, that's only the Qatar money. We haven't even discussed Turkey yet, or Somalia, or your campaign finance violations, or the immigration fraud. Mr. Chairman, Omar's lawyer was on his feet now. I need to confer with my client. I request a recess. Denied, Chairman Jordan said, his voice carrying across the chaos. Deputy Director Bongino was invited here to testify. Representative Omar chose to question him. She's getting her answers. We'll continue. Jordan looked at Bongino. Deputy Director, please proceed. Dan Bongino smiled, the cold, professional smile of a cop who just gotten a confession. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to. This is going to take a while. He had 4 more folders, and all of them had Ilhan Omar's name on them. Bongino opened his next folder with the careful precision of a prosecutor who'd organized his evidence for maximum impact. Let's start with the money. Congresswoman, because money tells us everything we need to know. FBI financial forensics is an art form. We can follow money anywhere. And we followed yours. He pulled out a large diagram and had it displayed on the screens, showing a flowchart of money moving through various shell corporations. This, he said, is your $250 making a journey. Let me walk you through it. December 18, 2022. You meet with Qatari officials in Doha. December 28, 2022. Qatar Foundation International transfers $250 to Meadowbrook Consulting LLC, a Cayman Islands shell corporation created 3 weeks earlier. It has no employees, no office, no website. January 3, 2023. Meadowbrook transfers the money to Atlantic Advisory Group, a Delaware LLC. Same story. January 6, 2023. Atlantic Advisory transfers the money to Strategic Outreach Partners, another shell company, this one based in Nevada. January 9, 2023. Strategic Outreach Partners transfers $250 to the E Street Group, your husband Tim Minette's firm, with the memo line, consulting services rendered. Bongino looked up. 4 transfers, 3 countries, multiple shell corporations created specifically to obscure the source. This isn't normal business, Congresswoman. This is money laundering. This is exactly how you hide bribes from foreign governments. Representative Matt Gaetz leaned into his microphone. Deputy Director, just to be clear, there's no legitimate business reason for this convoluted path? None whatsoever, Congressman, Bongino replied. If E Street Group was actually providing services, Qatar could have wired the money directly. They didn't because they needed to hide it. We have the bank records. We have the emails. We have everything. He turned back to Omar. Congresswoman, what consulting services did your husband's firm provide to Qatar for $250? I don't involve myself in my husband's business. But you vote on issues that directly affect his clients. Bongino shot back. So, what services? Silence. You can't answer because there were no services. The firm received $250,000 for doing nothing except being married to you. He pulled out another document. And we have additional evidence. The FBI executed search warrants on your husband's email and text messages. We found communications between him and intermediaries for the Qatari government. He read from a text. 2. Khalid al-Mansouri, Qatari operative, from Tim Minette. Ilhan will handle the Iran vote as discussed. She understands the importance to your principles. The arrangement is working well. Next payment can be processed after the vote is confirmed. The hearing room gasped. That's your husband, Congresswoman, explicitly stating you'll vote a specific way and mentioning the next payment. That's pay-for-play corruption. Senator Tom Cotton spoke up. Deputy Director, has she registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act? No, sir, she has not, Bongino said, which is another federal crime. Mr. Chairman, Representative Jim Jordan leaned forward. You said you'd get to Turkey. Is there more foreign bribery? Yes, Mr. Chairman, Bongino said, closing the Qatar folder and reaching for the next. Significantly more. Congresswoman, he said, Qatar paid you $250. That's bad, but what Turkey paid you for was worse. Bongino opened the second folder. Labeled, Turkey. Without pause. Maintaining the relentless pressure. Congresswoman, let's talk about Turkey. In March 2023, 2 months after the Qatar payment, your husband's firm received another payment. This one for $180. It came from a company called Bosphorus Strategic Advisors. He displayed the registration documents. Sounds American, doesn't it? But it's registered in Istanbul. And when the FBI traced its funding, we found it's backed by entities connected to the Turkish government. 3 of its 5 board members have direct ties to Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, what did Turkey pay you for? Bongino asked. Let me show you the timeline. March 7, 2023. $180 is wired to your husband's firm from Bosphorus Strategic Advisors. March 29, 2023. The House votes on H-Res. 296. The resolution to formally recognize the Armenian genocide. March 29, 2023. You, Congresswoman Omar, vote no on recognizing the Armenian genocide. Bongino let that hang in the air. For those who don't follow Turkish politics, he explained, Turkey has spent a century denying the systematic killing of 1.5 million Armenian Christians. It's one of the most well-documented genocides in history. He pulled out her voting records. The House has voted on this before. In 2019, you voted yes to recognize it. In 2021, you voted yes again. Your position was clear and consistent. But in March 2023, just 22 days after receiving $180 from a Turkish government-linked entity, you suddenly changed your mind. You reversed your position. You were one of only 12 members to vote against recognition. You changed your vote, Bongino said, his voice flat and cold. You gave a floor speech defending Turkey's position. All after Turkey paid you $180. That's not evolving views. Congresswoman, that's purchased influence. Representative Matt Gaetz jumped in. Deputy Director, was there other Turkish-related activity around this time? Yes, sir, Bongino replied. In June 2023, there was a vote on whether to sanction Turkey for purchasing Russian S-400 missile defense systems, a major national security concern. Since Turkey is a NATO ally, the Biden administration supported sanctions. Congressional leadership supported sanctions, but Congresswoman Omar voted no. She was one of only 11 members to vote against sanctioning Turkey. He pulled out more documents. Then, in July 2023, she traveled to Turkey, again. Without proper notification to the State Department. She met with President Erdogan. And she praised him publicly. He read from her Twitter post. Productive discussion with President Erdogan about Turkish-American cooperation. Turkey is a vital ally and we must strengthen our partnership. President Erdogan's leadership has brought stability. Stability? Bongino scoffed. Erdogan has imprisoned tens of thousands of political opponents, shut down independent media, and attacked Kurdish populations. But you praised him. Right after he paid you. He then produced the smoking gun email. The FBI executed search warrants on your husband's email accounts. We found this correspondence between Tim Minnet and a Turkish official named Murat Yilmaz. He read the email. Dear Mr. Yilmaz, thank you for the March payment. Ilhan will handle the Armenian vote as discussed. She understands the arrangement. Regarding the S-400 sanctions vote in June, we'll need an additional payment to cover that. The political risk is higher. I suggest $100 for that vote. Please confirm. The hearing room erupted. Democrats were shouting. Reporters were in a frenzy. Your husband, Bongino continued over the noise, was negotiating the price of your congressional votes, email by email, with foreign governments. That's the definition of corruption. My husband's business dealings, Omar shrieked, are not separate when you are the product being sold. Bongino cut her off. His business is giving foreign governments access to your vote. That's not consulting. That's brokering corruption. Deputy Director, Senator Tom Cotton spoke up. His face grim. The congresswoman sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. She has access to classified information about Turkey. If they have compromised her, what's the national security risk? Substantial. Congressman Bongino replied, if Turkey has a sitting member of the Foreign Affairs Committee on their payroll, they could be getting classified information they shouldn't have. That's why this is a counterintelligence investigation. And the Turkish payments, Bongino added, totaled $305 by the end of 2023. During which time you voted in Turkey's interests on 9 separate occasions. He closed the Turkey folder and reached for the third, labeled, Somalia. Congresswoman, Qatar bought your votes. Turkey bought your votes. But now let's talk about your ancestral homeland. Let's talk about arms embargoes. Let's talk about your brother-in-law. And let's talk about how you tried to make $8 million by facilitating weapons sales that would have armed terrorists. For the first time, real, abject fear crossed Omar's face. Bongino opened the third folder. This one contained photographs and text message transcripts. Congresswoman Omar, he began, in 2021, you became a vocal advocate for lifting the U.S. arms embargo on Somalia. You gave interviews. You wrote op-eds. You lobbied your colleagues. You argued the Somali government needed weapons to fight al-Shabaab terrorists. On its face, Bongino said, that's a legitimate foreign policy position. But what you didn't disclose, not to your colleagues, not to the Ethics Committee, not to the American people, was that you had a direct financial interest in lifting that embargo. He displayed a corporate registration document. This is Mogadishu Defense Systems, a Somali arms importing company registered in 2020. It was created specifically to import weapons if the embargo was lifted. And one of the 3 principals of this company is Ahmed Minet, your husband's brother, your brother-in-law. He pulled out financial projections. According to internal company documents obtained by the FBI, Mogadishu Defense Systems projected $40 million in revenue in the first year after the embargo was lifted. They had contracts lined up. They just needed you to get the embargo lifted. This is, Omar stammered. It's worse than that, Congresswoman, Bongino said, because she wasn't just advocating. She was planning to personally profit. He produced WhatsApp message transcripts. The FBI obtained communications between you, your husband Tim Minet, and your brother-in-law Ahmed Minet, discussing the arms deal. Let me read them. December 15, 2021, Ilhan Omar to Tim Minet. When does Ahmed think the embargo will lift? I'm pushing hard in Congress but need timeline. December 15, 2021, Tim Minet, reply. He says if it happens by Q2 2022. Company will hit 40M first year. We discussed terms. You'll get 15% of profits as agreed. December 15, 2021, Ilhan Omar, reply. 15% isn't enough given the risk I'm taking. Political exposure is massive if this gets out. I need 20%. December 16, 2021, Ahmed Minet, joins chat. We can do 20%. You're making this happen. Fair compensation. But payments need to be offshore. Cayman accounts. December 16, 2021, Ilhan Omar, reply. Agreed. 20% to Cayman account. Now, let me get this embargo lifted. The hearing room was in absolute chaos. This wasn't just corruption. This was a conspiracy. In writing. Congresswoman, Bongino continued relentlessly. You negotiated a 20% cut of a $40 million weapons deal. That's $8 million to yourself. For using your congressional position to lift an arms embargo. And you wanted it paid to offshore accounts to hide it from U.S. authorities. But here's where it gets really bad. Bongino said, his voice dropping, because FBI intelligence indicates that Mogadishu Defense Systems wasn't just planning to supply the Somali government. They had side deals to divert weapons to other buyers. And some of those buyers were al-Shabaab affiliates. The room went dead silent. Al-Shabaab, Bongino clarified, is a designated foreign terrorist organization. They're allied with al-Qaeda. And your brother-in-law's company was planning to sell them weapons. He displayed surveillance photos. These are photographs taken by FBI surveillance teams in Mogadishu in early 2022. This man, he pointed, is Ahmed Minet, meeting with Hassan Ali K., a known al-Shabaab facilitator. They are discussing weapons shipments. We had an informant in this meeting. He read from the informant's report. Ahmed Minnet stated that once the U.S. embargo was lifted, the company could supply the Somali government officially, while diverting 20 to 30% of shipments to alternate buyers for higher profit margins. When asked who these buyers were, Minnet indicated armed groups, including al-Shabaab affiliates. Minnet stated his sister-in-law, the congresswoman, was working to lift the embargo and would receive a percentage of all profits, including from the diverted sales. Representative Cotton stood up, his face red with fury. Let me understand this. She was going to help arm al-Shabaab, a terrorist organization that has killed Americans, in exchange for $8 million? And she was using her position in Congress to make it happen? That's what the evidence indicates. Congressman Bongino replied. That's not corruption. Cotton shouted. That's treason. That's providing material support to terrorists. She should be arrested right now. The evidence is being reviewed by the DOJ for potential charges under terrorism statutes, Bongino said calmly. He then read one more message. From January 2022. January 2022, Ilhan Omar to Ahmed Minnet. Embargo push failed for now. Too much resistance. But I'll keep trying. This deal is too lucrative to abandon. 8M is 8M. January 2022. Ahmed Minnet, reply, understood. We'll keep everything ready. Al-Shabaab buyers are patient. January 2022. Ilhan Omar, reply, agreed. And nobody can know about the Al-Shabaab connection. If that gets out, I'm finished. Bongino looked up. If that gets out, I'm finished. You knew. You knew the weapons were going to terrorists. You knew it was illegal. You knew it was treasonous. And you tried to do it anyway, because you wanted $8 million. He closed the folder. For the first time, real, abject fear was visible on Omar's face. Bongino opened the fourth folder. Her lawyer, at this point, had physically put his hand over Omar's mouth. Congresswoman Omar, Bongino began, there's been speculation for years about your immigration history. Specifically, about your 2009 marriage to Ahmed Noor Said Elmi. The media has alleged he was your biological brother and that you married him to circumvent immigration law. You've called this a conspiracy theory. You've called it Islamophobic. You've called it racist lies. He pulled out a document. You've always refused to provide DNA evidence to disprove it. But here's the thing about criminal investigations. Congresswoman, we don't need your permission. When the FBI has probable cause to believe immigration fraud has occurred, we can obtain DNA samples through lawful means. And we did. He pulled out a lab report. This is a DNA analysis from the FBI laboratory in Quantico. During our investigation, we obtained DNA samples from you, from Ahmed Noor Said Elmi, and from your father, Noor Omar Muhammad. Your sample came from a coffee cup you discarded at a congressional hearing. Elmi's came from a cigarette butt during FBI surveillance. Your father's came from medical records he provided to immigration. Bongino held up the report. The results are conclusive and scientifically certain. Ahmed Noor Said Elmi shares 50% of his DNA with you. Not 12.5% for a cousin. Exactly 50%. That is the DNA match for full siblings who share both biological parents. The room was dead silent. Ahmed Noor Said Elmi is your brother. Congresswoman, your biological brother. And you married him. Representative Gates was on his feet. Deputy Director. Is there any possibility the DNA test is wrong? No, sir, Bongino said. The match is 99.999% accurate. We ran the test twice. It is scientific fact. He is her brother. Bongino then displayed the immigration timeline. 2009. You legally marry your brother. Elmi. 2011. Elmi obtains U.S. permanent residency based on his marriage to you. 2017. You conveniently divorce him. 2018. You legally marry Ahmed Hersi, the man you'd been living with the entire time. You married your brother to get him U.S. residency. Bongino stated, that's immigration fraud, a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison and deportation. But the immigration fraud isn't the only crime here. Bongino continued, pulling out tax records. Let's talk about tax fraud. From 2009 to 2017, while you were legally married to your brother, You filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi, who you were not legally married to. That's perjury on your tax forms. You can't file jointly with someone you're not married to. He displayed the tax forms side by side. 2011 tax return. Married filing jointly, with Ahmed Hirsi. But your legal spouse was Ahmed Elmi. 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, all filed jointly with the wrong man. That's 8 years of tax fraud. 8 separate federal crimes. And here, Bongino pulled out one final document. Is the kicker. When your brother, Elmi, applied for residency, he had to submit evidence of a genuine marital relationship. You provided all of it. You signed these affidavits, swearing under oath that you were in a real marriage. You submitted these fake photos. These fake joint documents to fool immigration authorities. That's fraud. That's perjury. That's conspiracy. Representative Nancy Mace spoke up. Deputy Director, this is incredibly serious. Why wasn't this investigated before? It was, ma'am, Bongino replied, but without the DNA. It was circumstantial. Once she became the subject of an FBI investigation for foreign bribery. We were able to obtain that DNA. Now we have the proof. Chairman Jordan looked at Omar, who was sitting with her head down. Her lawyer whispering urgently, Deputy Director, you mentioned there was one more folder. What's left to cover? Campaign finance violations, Mr. Chairman, Bongino said, including her involvement in the Feeding Our Future fraud. The largest pandemic fraud in American history, where $250 million meant to feed hungry children was stolen. We have evidence she took money from those criminals and protected them from investigation in exchange. That's the last folder. He reached for it. Bongino opened the final folder. Omar was broken. She just sat there, staring at the table, as the man who'd once walked a beat in New York City systematically destroyed every last shred of her life. Let's talk about your campaign, Congresswoman, because your corruption didn't stop with foreign governments. You also stole from your own supporters. He pulled out FEC reports. Between 2019 and 2024, your campaign paid your husband's firm, E Street Group, $2.738.000. Almost $3 million. The FEC investigated and fined you. Case closed, right? Bongino shook his head. Wrong, because the FEC didn't know about the foreign payments. They didn't know that this was money laundering. He displayed a flowchart. Here's how it worked. Qatar pays $250 to the E Street Group. E Street Group then bills your campaign for $300 in consulting. Your campaign pays E Street from donor funds. Now the Qatari money looks like clean campaign money. Donors gave you money thinking they were supporting your work. Instead, their money was being used to disguise bribes from Qatar and Turkey. That's wire fraud. That's mail fraud. That's theft by deception. But wait, Bongino said, there's more. Let's talk about the Feeding Our Future fraud. The $250 million scheme where criminals stole money meant to feed hungry children during COVID. He displayed photos of the individuals convicted. Amy Bach, Abdi Aziz Farah, Said Farah, all convicted, all sentenced to long prison terms. And all of them donated to your campaign. Total $16.100. Now, getting donations from criminals isn't necessarily your fault, Bongino said, but here's the problem. The FBI raided their operations in January 2022. It was front-page news. Everyone in Minnesota knew these people had stolen from children. And you kept their money for over a year. You didn't return it until March 2023. 14 months later. And only after the national media started asking questions. He pulled out the final emails. But it's worse than just keeping their money. The FBI obtained emails between you and Amy Bach from 2021. Before the fraud was exposed. He read them. August 12, 2021. Amy Bach to Omar. We are facing increased scrutiny from federal auditors. We need your help pushing back on this overreach. August 13, 2021. Omar to Bach. Amy. I'll reach out to HHS and USDA contacts about the audit. We'll protect you from overreach. Let me know if you need anything else. November 2021. Bach to Omar. The audit pressure is increasing. Can you help delay? November 2021. Omar to Bach. Working on it. Appreciate your support for my campaign. You explicitly connected protecting her from investigation to her campaign donations. Bongino thundered. That's a quid pro quo. That's obstruction of justice. You took money from criminals who were stealing from hungry children. And in exchange, you protected them from federal investigators. Bongino organized all his folders in a single, damning row. Let me summarize, he said, his voice cold. Foreign bribery from Qatar, $250. Foreign bribery from Turkey, $305. Attempted Somalia weapons deal with al-Shabaab, $8 million. Acting as an unregistered foreign agent for 3 countries. Money laundering. Conspiracy to provide material support to terrorism. Immigration fraud. Marrying your biological brother. Tax fraud, 8 counts. Perjury on federal documents. Obstruction of justice. Protecting the, feeding our future, criminals. Campaign finance violations. Funneling millions to your husband. He looked at the committee. Total federal felony counts, 47. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Bongino said, I've been a cop for 25 years. I've investigated murderers, terrorists, and corrupt politicians. You are one of the most comprehensively corrupt individuals I have ever investigated. You sold your office. You married your brother. You stole from your donors. You protected criminals who stole from hungry children. You are a fraud. You are a criminal. And you belong in federal prison. Chairman Jordan's voice was grim. Deputy Director Bongino, what happens next? Bongino looked at his watch. At 2 p.m. today. Approximately 2 hours from now. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia will unseal indictments charging Ilhan Omar with 47 federal felonies. FBI agents are currently en route to execute search warrants on her offices and homes. At approximately 3 p.m., FBI agents will arrest Representative Omar. The DOJ will recommend she be held without bail as a substantial flight risk, given her foreign contacts and access to offshore funds. Omar's lawyer was frantically gathering papers. Congresswoman, Bongino said, looking directly at her, I'd suggest you make arrangements for your children. You are going to federal prison for a very long time. He stood up. Mr. Chairman, my testimony is complete. The aftermath was swift. Omar was arrested that afternoon. The House voted 418-3 to remove her from Congress. After a 4-week trial, where the DNA evidence, NSA intercepts, and her own texts were presented, she was found guilty on 43 counts. At sentencing, the judge called her a fundamental betrayer of the public trust and sentenced her to 35 years in federal prison. He also revoked her U.S. citizenship, which had been obtained through fraud. Upon her release, she will be deported to Somalia. Dan Bongino held one press conference. This wasn't about politics, religion, or race, he said. It was about evidence. The FBI doesn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. We care about your conduct. And Ilhan Omar's conduct was criminal.